green complexion. Like green, like if you ever look at an Ethiopian, they have that green complexion. That greenish complexion. This was the complexion of Usia. That was the pureness. When they use the term melanin, this is pure melanin. And because of that, he became known as the Great One, or that God-like character. But what happened was, thank you, he married into also royalty by marrying Aset. Because Aset, or Aset, as they call it, or Isis, I don't like that word. Her name is Aset. But you know, Greeks call her Isis for when kids, when you go to school, when they say Isis, they really mean Aset. What happens is, she was of royalty. So they came together, but he was known as a deity from the line of the Netur, or the Netir. And he became known as a god in English. He was one of the biggest gods according to them when he stepped into the dynastic period. So what happened was, Aset and him knew that they were going to have to conceive for, you know, the legacy of the Caliph, or the one behind him to come. And he had a brother by the name of Satuk. Now in history, they got to Satuk's, one of Satuk's parents they're claiming was not of Earth. Usia's parents was of Earth that lived here as Natir. But Satuk had one parent that was Natir, somebody that wandered in, you know, from somewhere else, some distant galaxy that they claim when you get to study. So Satuk didn't look as handsome as his brother. But Aset's sister was given to, named Nephis, was given to Satuk to be his wife to keep that balancement in the family. And Nephis never liked Satuk, she liked who? Usia. As time went on, when it came time when Aset was becoming fertile, Nephis was fertile at the same time. But they collaborated, they were saying, I don't really want to have a child by Satuk. Look at him. And you know, they called Satuk Set. Set had orange hair, he was kind of busted, but he was strong, and he had a real aggressive mentality. So what happened was, Aset and Nephis looked like twins. Even though Aset was a year older, they looked just like twins, same height, everything, and they both were fine. They both were very beautiful. So what happened was, they got together on a feast because they knew that they was going to commemorate her getting pregnant. A feast, they collaborated together, and every time they had a feast, Usia was the one that made beer and wine, because it was the Egyptians that made beer and wine. So what happened was, they're telling, you know, we're getting ready to have a feast, so, you know, Usia said, okay, I'll get busy with my servants. So he's getting the beer together, and she's constantly telling them to test it, test it, test it. And then she gives them the wine to test it. You know, a lot of beer and wine, you don't walk straight no more. You start, yeah, I'm gliding now. So he got a little nice, for the lack of a better term, and we know that. And upon doing that, at the feast, remember, he was going to conceive with Aset. So he walks his way to go into his chamber, knowing he's going to run into her. But what he saw in the hallway, he thought was Aset, was Nephis, dressed just like her sister, looking just like her sister. You know, he a little nice, so he was like, come on, baby, you know, let's go take this walk. So then, she bears child. So Satuk got pissed to the highest of festivities. You know, he found out his boo pregnant, he know he didn't do it. So he knew it was his brother by the twinkle she had in my eye every time he came around. It don't take much for us to see. You looking at him and say, oh, you what? It don't take much for us, we know. So Satuk himself came up with an idea of having a festival himself. But in his festival, he also got, as Usia, drunk. But he got into the drunk point where he fell out. And then the story goes, they cut him up in 14 pieces. They threw his pieces all over Egypt and into the Nile. And then she was supposed to conceive. Aset did have a child, but the story goes, she didn't lay with no man or no man touched her. Now, Nephis gave birth to who we call Anu, the dog face. That was the baby between Usia and her. And then Aset gives birth to who we call today Haru. And And then that started, because remember, Asaru had a baby, and she didn't lie with no man, and no man touched her. So that became a special impregnation. If you know about the men principle in the men temple, then we'll discuss it a little later on. But until that point, it went down in Roman philosophy and all that. And once again, she didn't lie with any man, or no man touched, but yet she conceived sounds from it. So later on, people started saying the Great Spirit coming through the vows of Ray impregnated her, because she had that association with Ray and all that. People started lying and making up false statements. In so much that when the Happy Kasab got it, the Hiskos, white folks, what happened was they made a story behind it about how this great God who had died, right, and the essence of himself was thrown inside of the great Nile River, but he was able to spiritually impregnate his wife, the Holy Ghost. And they called it the Holy Ghost. And then started calling her Mary. They started calling her Mary, and then they started taking the depiction of Asaru nourishing, breastfeeding her son, Haru. Later on, these same people took it and became known as a Black Madonna. And then you have this woman with this elaborate clothing on with a dark-skinned child, because she's dark. As centuries go back later, she started whitening up, and she became Mary, the Blessed Mother Mary, with the child Jesus. And they had to throw in the manger, because when they threw in the part of the manger, they couldn't explain the royalty of Usia with Asaru and Haru, so they had to go the opposite. They went from royalty down to a bond. But then when you go back and you read the original Greek in the Old Testament, you'll find out that it was an inn. We call it an inn today, like an inn or motel. That's where she conceived. And then she conceived the child, but they say it's in a barn, to supersede, to make the child special. That ain't special being brought up in no barn with no dogs and cows. Back then it was, because one of the safest places was a barn. That's not in this day and time. So that's where the manger story came from. If you go by all these men that have put it together in this day and time in the 2000s, year 2000, they'll tell you that what it represented was the fact that you had a star constellation. Because Jesus represents the star constellation called Pisces. And they call the Pisces the two fish. If you go to the book of Matthew and the book of John, you'll see how he is saying that I went and got men and made them fishers of men. I went and had two fish. A lot of Christians today have that fish symbol on the back of their car, but they don't know what it represents. It represents the star constellation of Pisces. Why? At the 2,000-year period of Aries superseded before the 2,000-year period of Pisces. Now, haven't you heard Jesus of 2,000 years ago? Because it marked a 2,000-year period. Jesus was born in the day one. We are in the year what? 2000 now. But we're not in the year of Aries anymore. We're in what? We're in the age of Aquarius, the water bearer. Prior before that, there was Pisces. And before that, there was Aries. And you knew it was Aries because Aries represented a horn. And that horn is what they call people to war, call people to assemble. And they went by the bull. If I do this, and I go to Judaism, which took it, they'll tell you about a sun. Because this is a sun. But they'll tell you that the sun represented man. And they'll tell you that this one represented the woman. Why? Because in Judaism, they're telling you that the man is over the woman. So, being that this was the man and this was the woman, by virtue of the points, if you feel me,